Hi, my name is Lynne Halamish. In this video, we'll be discussing just one question. Should I take my child to a family funeral? We'll start with an opening exercise, and afterwards we'll discuss reasons to take my child to the funeral or not to take my child to the funeral. We'll then speak about the benefits of taking a child to a funeral and what age is appropriate for bringing your child to the funeral. Finally, towards the end, we'll be speaking about preparation of the child for attending a funeral and how much your child can actually understand. I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll be able to make a more confident decision for your children whether or not to attend a family funeral. I would like to share a clinical story with you to start with. A 10-year-old boy came to his mother to deal with the death of his brother that occurred 7 years previously when he was only 3 years old. When his brother's funeral had taken place, he wasn't asked if he wanted to attend the funeral because his parents thought it would be too traumatic for him, too difficult, and they wanted to protect him. They were afraid that he would become traumatized after the funeral. He was only 3 years old after all. They were afraid he would panic, have nightmares. So now, 7 years later, he said to his mother, "Everyone in my family was at the funeral except me. I was all alone at home." On further examination, of course, it turned out he wasn't all alone at home. He had a babysitter, but he was without all his family members who were attending the funeral. He said, "I never had a chance to say goodbye." The fact that he was only 3 years old doesn't really matter here. He's right. Just when his whole family was traumatized by the death of a brother and a son, he was abandoned by his family in the name of protection. He wasn't even allowed to be with them exactly when he, too, had lost a family member. Even if he didn't realize the final impact of that loss, of course, none of the adults realized the final impact of that loss at that point in time either. At his vulnerable age, he needed more support, not less. So, why are we afraid to take our children to funerals or even speak with them about death? Mostly it's about protection. We want to protect the child from death. They're too young to have to deal with it. What do children, after all, have to do with death? If we erect a wall between them and all bad things, maybe we can protect them from those things. Let's see how this actually holds up in our lives. I would like to ask all of you who are listening to please think back. Close your eyes for a moment. Think back to your very first encounter with death. In your childhood, think back. It could have been a family pet that died. It could have been a dead animal that had been hit by a car that you saw in the street. It also could have been a neighbor, a friend, or a member of your immediate family. Maybe a schoolmate. Think back to that time. What was it? How old were you? How did you find out about it? Were you told, or did you overhear adults talking about it? How did you feel? If it was a family member, did you attend the funeral? If you didn't, where were you when others attended? Open your eyes, please, now. What are the advantages of not taking a child to the funeral? A child's vulnerable. We want to prevent any injury, any trauma, physically or emotionally. A funeral is difficult for us. Why subject a small child to this? It's really terrible that death exists. It's a very difficult thing. If only it didn't, and we could actually prevent the contact with this pain. The real problem is that it does exist. If we don't have the child participate, perhaps there's a possibility that we can prevent death from being part of his life. Maybe the child will become uncomfortable or frightened at the funeral, and then what? What will I do? Another reason not to take a small child to the funeral is that I'll be free to mourn as I want to without having to worry about another child or his response if I don't bring him. Can you think of other advantages to not taking a child to the funeral? I'd like to tell you another story, another clinical story. Once I was training a class of nurses, and while I was training them, I gave them an assignment to ask 3 children under the age of 8 3 questions about death. These children could be healthy children or not healthy children. It wasn't material. It was immaterial to me. When they returned with their assignments, I asked a few of them to present to the class the material that they had made. And one of them said, I went to my best friend, who's also a nurse, whose father had lived with her for years, and she had 3 children under the age of 8. Her father had died 2 months previously, so I thought her children would be perfect to ask these questions. When I asked if I could ask these 3 questions to her children about death, she refused vehemently and categorically to allow me to speak with her children about death. I was very surprised, and I said, but Lynne, your father, who was living with your family, died 2 months ago. Your children have experienced the death of a family member. No, she replied, I never told them he died. Well, she answered confused, what did you tell him when he never came home again? Lynne replied, I told him he was lost. Lost? Lost and nobody's looking for him? So my student asked, but a month ago, your dog died. What did you tell them? What did you tell them then? I told them he was also lost. So this is what those children get. 1, if you get lost, nobody's going to look for you. And 2, the grandpa and the dog are wandering around, let's get dramatic, in a fog forever. This is comforting? I don't really think so. In fact, not only can we not prevent death from being part of our child's life, we cannot even predict when death will enter our child's life. Now, let's examine how attending a funeral can actually benefit a child. A funeral is a family ritual. A child has a right to be at a family ritual. He's part of the family. Not necessarily if it's a ritual about the extended family, but the immediate family. Who might this include? All of the members of the household where the child lives are included in this. Also, with whom the child is involved on a regular basis, like a grandparent that the child sees regularly. If the grandparent is living in another country far away and the child never sees them, that's not necessary. Or an aunt or an uncle or an au pair. People that the child is in contact with on a regular basis. Why? What are the possible benefits for a child attending a funeral? A, the child's presence at a funeral helps him understand that a death has occurred. This is actually the presence of all of us at a funeral. It helps us understand that as adults also. The child sees that they're not the only one that's mourning. They're not alone. It reduces the isolation. They're not excluded and left to mourn alone with the confusion of trying to figure out what's going on by themselves. They enter into their culture and the cultural norms of the funeral. They see what's happening and are not left to their imagination, which is almost always worse than reality. If they are seen and recognized as mourners, they may receive support and expressions of comfort that they would not otherwise receive. Barring their attendance, even in condolence calls, they will be ignored by the comforters, who will assume that you don't want to relate to them as mourners. This produces a feeling of sidelining or isolating the children. Another reason is the responses of others towards them can assure them that they're not culpable for the loss. Children are subject to a phenomena that's Joan Didion called magical thinking. Small children believe they have responsibility or control over the world. For example, if I hated my brother, that might be why he died. If I got angry with him, that might be why he died. Or if I yelled at my mom, that might be why she died. And the end result of this thinking can be, it's my fault. I killed the person. I'm guilty of the death itself. The visual and audio aspects of funerals vary in different cultures. There are, for example, cultures like the Germanic cultures that are very quiet and restrained in public grief. There are also cultures, North African, for example, that are extremely expressive in public grief. That could include loud outcries, pulling hair, scratching the face until blood comes, or throwing yourself on the grave and on the fresh grave. In both, my advice is the same. Whether traumatic, unexpected, or not, it's very important for the children to participate. But it is also very important to prepare him for the experience. If we have established that it's more protective to have a child attend a funeral than to exclude him, the next question is, from what age should a child attend a family funeral? Well, most experts in the field agree that from the age of 7, every child should attend the funeral of every immediate family member. I personally believe that all of the children in the family should attend, unless there's a compelling reason why someone shouldn't, regardless of age, even infants. I even hesitate to include this unless there's a compelling reason, because if you're frightened about it, you may think you have a compelling reason when you don't have a compelling reason. What is a compelling reason? If the child is currently hospitalized, that is a compelling reason not to attend a funeral. Funerals are usually much less traumatic for children than for adults. If they're well prepared, they will handle the funeral at face value. So, what if the child doesn't want to attend? So, I have another question for you. What if the child doesn't want to put on a seatbelt when he gets in the car? The real answer is, if you believe his attending the funeral is helpful for him and is protection for him, you'll have him attend the funeral. You won't ask if he wants to attend. You just take him, with preparation that I'll outline in a moment, to the funeral with the rest of the family. If the child doesn't want to attend, it means, 1, or the child has been given a choice that he shouldn't have been given, and 2, the child has received frightening information or feelings about the impending funeral or funerals in general. The funeral will likely calm him down with the somewhat boring reality of what a funeral actually is. Now, it depends also how you present the whole thing to the child. If you say, "Do you want to come to the funeral?" He's not going to want to come to the funeral. If you say, "We're all going to the funeral tomorrow," it's a different story. The question is actually not, does my child have to come to the funeral? The question is actually, does my child have the right to come to the funeral? And if he's an immediate family member, he does have the right to come to the funeral. The obvious answer is actually yes. I'd like to tell you another story. I was speaking to a client, a dying client that I will call Shoshi, and her husband, Shai. "What about the funeral?" Shoshi asked. This was odd. Usually the healthy spouse asks this question, not the dying spouse, but if asked, it needs to be addressed. "The children should be there," I said. "But with each child, somebody should accompany them individually. Someone who's not from the immediate family, but someone who is close to the child and trusted by the child." "But," she said quietly, "there's a dilemma." "What's the dilemma?" I asked. "My family is from a culture where grieving process is frequently accompanied by screaming and yelling, falling on the grave and fainting." I replied, "I understand that it can be frightening, but this is their culture. And if it's their culture, it belongs to them. They simply must be prepared ahead of time. They should be told what can or will happen, told it's not dangerous, it's okay, it's an expression, it's our culture. And each one is accompanied by someone, so that if it's too difficult for Shai, your husband, to be with the children, or if he breaks down at the funeral, they won't be alone. And Shai, it's important for you to tell him, there's a strong possibility that I will cry, and that's okay. I will stand when I need to, and I will cry when I need to. What if one of the children says, "I don't want to go," she asked. First of all, you don't ask. It's a family ceremony. No one has a greater right to be there in that whole funeral than Shoshi's children. And there's no country in the world that doesn't have some ritual surrounding death. Because we think it helps. We want to help the children, no? They will see that there are many people care about their mother, that many people will be in attendance. They will see that they're not the only ones that suffer the loss and miss Shoshi. They won't be isolated. And they'll have a place to mourn instead of being all alone at home outside of the mourning circle. That would force them to manage alone, and this can cause great confusion for children. Instead, each child is with an adult and told step by step ahead of time what will be happening. No surprises, including what they're expected to do and how they are expected to respond. You can say, "People may cry and scream. You can cry and scream also if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to." So they know what's expected of them. If others know you consider the children mourners, they too will consider the children mourners, and they, the children, will receive expressions of love and care that they would not otherwise receive. If you don't consider the children mourners, everyone will ignore them and they will be marginalized. Children can cope with things if they have enough preparation, if they're told exactly what will happen. "Shoshi," I said to her. "Yes," she replied. "You are really a hero." "I hope," she replied. I said, "Your willingness to look at things, to think about matters of burial, to think about every possible way to protect your children, to write them blessings, to say goodbye to them, you're really a hero." I continued, "I hope that when my time comes, I'll be a hero like you." I'd like to continue this particular story. Less than 24 hours after this conversation, Shoshi died. Shai called to tell me. He also wanted to be reminded about how to tell the children and what should be done at the funeral. We went over all the details. "So, the funeral's tomorrow?" "No, it's tonight at 10 p.m. "Oh, no, a night funeral." I personally have only attended one night funeral a few years ago, and if there's one thing that can make a funeral worse, it's to have it at night. But according to some religious observance, it's forbidden to delay the funeral at all, so night funerals actually do happen. When I went to the night funeral, there were spotlights at various points in the graveyard. Picture this: many people murmuring together, mostly in dark clothing, some praying and some speaking softly to each other, dressed in dark colors and walking through a spotlight, partially illuminated graveyard at night. Because of the spotlights, the shadows of the people attending and walking to the open grave are silhouetted on the gravestones as they pass. The body is moving along, in this particular case, no coffin. It's in a shroud. The body's moving along on a wheeled stretcher. I thought, how can children go to a night funeral? But I shook myself out of my few seconds of trance and thought, this is no different. It's just culture. So I added to Shai, "Tell the children it'll be at night. Tell them there will be spotlights. And these spotlights make shadows on all of the surroundings, just like spotlights and flashlights always do. Tell them it's just shadows and it's fine." What can help? What can help? I thought to myself. Give each one a small flashlight, I said. I felt my heart was in my mouth as I spoke these last sentences to him, wondering how it would be. I know the taboo against bringing small children to funerals is also one that I have to fight in me. And I didn't want this taboo to be able to move on to the next generation, but sometimes fact and theory are a little different. A few hours later, I received a message on my phone from Shai. "Dear Lynne, the funeral was a really good experience and very significant for the children. We'll speak later in the week. Thank you so much, Shai." So preparing the child, what does it involve? It involves describing what will happen at the funeral play by play. For example, someone will have washed your mom and wrapped her in a clean white cloth if we're dealing with a shroud. Or someone will have washed and dressed your mom's body in her favorite clothing, and she will be lying in a cushioned, beautiful wooden box, if that's the case, called a casket. This casket with your mom will be placed on a table in a room, and people will walk by to see her one last time. You can also do that if you want to, but you don't have to. Some people may touch her. If you want, you can, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Or if we're talking about a shroud, they will gently and respectfully pass your mom's body to a man standing in a hole in the ground. He will lay her body down, and over it will put cement blocks so no dirt will get on your mom. He will then climb out, and people will begin taking shovels, and from a large pile of earth will fill the hole. Usually when this starts to happen, some people start to cry. You can cry if you want to. You don't have to cry if you don't want to. Tell him what is expected of him during the proceedings, making sure there's an accompanying person, a separate one for each child, not first-string relatives, but someone that the child feels comfortable with, maybe a neighbor or a teacher from the school, whatever. The family stands together with the child. The accompanying person is behind each child, in this case. The accompanying person brings a bottle of water and tissue for the child, in case it's needed. A sign is arranged between the child and the accompanying person for when the child doesn't want to be approached by comforters and the accompanying person blocks them. The accompanying person will take the child further away from the grave upon the child's request. And following the funeral, describe what the next related activity will be and what he or she is expected to do or how they should behave there. How much can the child understand? There's usually 4 perimeters that are involved in the child's understanding of what goes on about death. 1 is cause. What is the cause of death? 1 is inevitability, that everyone dies eventually. 1 is irreversibility, that the dead don't come back here. And 1 is the totality, that is, that every physical function stops. Well, in this short webinar, we've discussed the pros and cons of taking a child to a funeral. We've also covered how to prepare a child for attending a funeral. And I hope you found this webinar useful. I would be very interested in hearing your comments, feedback, and questions. If you're willing, please contact me through my website. I would like to bless you with the blessing of Jonathan Swift. May you live every day of your life. Thank you very much.